know the true meaning of loss. Even the most innocent, many claim, have reason to fear. Those who believe the old tales say the fairies are stealers of children. In cradles where infants are put down for the night, they leave changelings, withered creatures who quickly waste away and die. According to legend, the stolen child will never grow old. Instead, it will live forever young in a realm without time. Discount it at your peril, because this realm, like the fairies themselves, has always been a mystery. Its existence has never been proved, but most mysterious of all, it has never been disproved either. Fairy tales, let's face it, are little more than children's stories and harmless superstitions. Only the very young or the very foolish could believe in them. We are too sophisticated, we know better, we have nothing to fear. Or do we? To many, even today, fairies are not the cute, gossamer-winged creatures of children's fiction. Those who believe speak of ghostly shapeshifters, spirits that can appear in any form, even that of humans. So how can we be absolutely certain we've never seen one? One old story tells of a fisherman in the north of Ireland who falls in love with a mermaid. Refusing to believe she's one of the fairy folk, he sets out to possess her.
And eventually a wise woman can give him the advice that he needs, and he realizes that every evening this beautiful girl unclips her tail and turns into a human for a certain amount of time as she sits by the sea singing. And so he steals the tail, and with the tail he takes her power, and so she must follow him home. And in the course of time this pair have two children, and the children are out playing one day and it's raining, and they rush into the barn to play, and they're throwing straw around, and they dig down through the straw in their game, and they come to this shiny iridescent thing under some old mouldy straw that hasn't been interrupted for years. And when the mother saw this beautiful shining iridescent thing lying in among the straw, she realized it was her tail, and she sent her children back into the house, and she clipped the tail on, and she flung herself off the highest cliffs and sang her way back out to sea, very happy at last. But when her husband came home that night, he was devastated to realise that his bride had gone, and he never saw her again. He was very, very unhappy. But at night, when the children are asleep, she would come back into the house and she would comb their hair and smile and sing to them, because she was happy to be back reunited with her own people at last.
A new version of an old tale, we might think. And yet, according to the local superstition of Rathlin Island on the northeast coast, the story is true. Here it's said, the descendants of that same mermaid live on. They can be identified, or so it's claimed, by the webs of skin between their toes. Brave indeed are those who would go there asking for proof. According to legend, the fairies are elusive, crafty creatures who can appear and disappear without trace. This, of course, is quite convenient for the weave folk. After all, if they are invisible, who's to say they don't exist? Some, however, actually claim to have found proof. During the 19th century in the southwest of Ireland, a farm labourer came across a strange object. He believed it was an actual shoe belonging to the fairies. Terrified of the bad luck that might befall him if he kept it, he quickly passed it on. Strange as it may seem, it still exists.
This is a shoe that was found first in 1834, and there are several strange things about it. First, you see that it shows signs of wear in the sole and heel. Secondly, it's been at some time mended rather clumsily. There are two heavy stitches in the back of the heel itself. At one time it's had laces. You can just see the eyelet holes at the end there. I've shown it to a cobbler. He tells me that it's as good work as any cobbler could do. Indeed better, because of its size, and you can see how small it is. I've also shown it to the curator of a dolls museum, and she says that it's certainly not a doll's shoe. It's far too well made for that. It would be interesting to have the leather tested in a laboratory. I've not had this done, but in order to do it properly, you'd have to snip a bit off the shoe, and I think that would probably, the fairies mightn't like that, might they?
Such fears may seem harmless enough, but others aren't quite so innocent. The poet W.B. Yeats once wrote, "Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand. For the world's more full of weeping than you can understand." This poem, The Stolen Child, has always had a bittersweet message. In the past, the legend of the changeling, the child stolen by the fairies, was never meant to entertain, and it often resonated with genuine tragedy.
There were changeling traditions. If your baby wasn't doing particularly well, perhaps it had been changed. It wasn't that the child was in some way handicapped or disadvantaged. The wee folk were to blame. They had substituted one of their own. Women in childbirth were often taken away by the fairies. Again, maternal mortality being an extraordinarily there's an extraordinarily high risk of maternal mortality here. And so fairies came to interact directly in people's lives in this kind of way, and could be blamed for all sorts of mishaps or things which might naturally go wrong, which were otherwise difficult to explain.
Crib death, Down syndrome, all sorts of maladies that affect the young might have been the cause of such superstitions. And by rights, medical science should have put an end to the changeling tradition 100 years ago. But strangely, it didn't. Even today, there are many still alive who remember ash being smeared on the faces of young children to ward off the wee folk. According to the changeling legend, the fairies are discerning, meticulous thieves, and filthy youngsters are of no interest to them. Once, customs like these were common. The little folk were spoken of in hushed voices. Certain places were said to be inhabited by the fairies, mounds and thorns and trees. Those who interfered with them, according to local superstition, risked a fate worse than death. Innocent nonsense, we might assume these days. But one fact remains. These places still exist. And to this day, even those who say they don't believe will never destroy them, dig them up, or even till the soil nearby. Why? What could they possibly have to fear? All over Ireland there are trees, ancient standing stones and hills, which, legend has it, are possessed by the fairies. Tamper with them, it's said, and you risk disaster. A quaint old custom, perhaps. But if this is the case, why do farmers still refuse to plough the soil where they stand? Why are modern roads and motorways diverted instead of passing through them? Why, in an age of rational thought, are these places still considered untouchable? Has an entire country gone mad? Or is it simply safer not to tamper with things we don't understand? Despite their strange appearance, many fairy forts, as we might suspect, are quite innocent. Some are raths, island homesteads which were common in Ireland right up to medieval times. But others have a much more ominous background. These are the tombs of Ireland's prehistoric ancestors, ancient mausoleums of stone and earth where the dead were buried over 4,000 years ago. Later, with the arrival of the Celtic people who came to Ireland centuries before the time of Christ, these old graveyards began to be seen as strange, supernatural places.
They knew that these tombs weren't part of the natural landscape. They knew that some peoples somehow had built them, but these were mysterious peoples of the past, so that they situated their continental Celtic gods in these tombs in Ireland, in these old raths in the landscape. And also the Celts had a belief that when one dies, one doesn't just disappear, that one lives on in another world beside